Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks so much for joining us. This is day 3 of our 4-day event, and I'm thrilled and delighted to introduce you to Kathy Murri, who's going to help us figure out how to create our own holiday. So, Kathy, take it away.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for having me here today, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Today, I'm going to talk about creating your own holiday, which might sound like a frivolous thing to do, but actually I think is a pretty necessary thing to do. And it's something that I think you can do even if you don't have a day to devote to a holiday, even if you only have 1 hour. First, let me tell you a little bit about me. I was a part-time caregiver for my mother who had dementia, and a respite caregiver for a friend who had motor neuron disease. And the significant losses in my life are both my parents who are gone, my mother-in-law, and the friend who died 3 years ago. I'm a certified caregiving consultant, certified caregiving facilitator, and a certified grief support specialist. And I also have master's degrees in business and education as my background. So I've done a lot of things, but I'm really happy to be doing this now. So I just want to acknowledge that we've been through a lot this year. We have been in and still are in a pandemic. It's winter now, which is dark for a lot of people and really a hard season to manage. People are feeling isolated and alone. And in addition, a lot of us are grieving for a lot of different reasons. There's many kinds of losses and many kinds of grief that we're experiencing. We may be mourning the loss of a special person, and our loss may be recent or distant, but no matter what, we all know it's always present in our lives. We may be mourning the loss of our usual routines due to the pandemic, just seeing people, going to work, our children going to school, visiting our elders, and also our usual holiday traditions, because we know the holidays were not the way we have expected them to be this year. And we also may be engaged in anticipatory mourning, like mourning something that we think might happen. Like we may be caring for someone who we know might have a life-limiting illness, or we may be just really worried about coronavirus and what's going to happen there. So there's a lot of grieving going on this year. But the good news is you made it through the holidays. So congratulations to everybody. You successfully navigated the most stressful time of year while processing grief in a holiday season that looks like none other we ever would have expected, and in a pandemic. So I hope you will all give yourselves a round of applause or a pat on the back or whatever makes you feel good, because it's really great that we've gotten to this place, and it's January 14th. Is that right? So yay for us. But now what? Now we're sort of in the January post-holiday slump. And in a normal year, a non-pandemic year, we would have had our usual holidays. Some of us would have traveled. We would have had relatives to visiting. We would have, connected with the people we love, and we may not have done that. And the grief is still with us, both on a personal and a universal level. And let's not forget, we're still in a pandemic. So if I don't know if you've come to any of our previous presentations, but one of the things that I talk about a lot is a daily action plan, daily practice of doing something for yourself, doing something for someone else, and do something for the person you're grieving. And I think Denise said you were planning to send out the link to our last event, maybe with the wrap up from this one, and I give more detail on that one there. But basically what I'm going to talk about today is doing something for yourself. There's certainly a lot of things you can do for yourself. You can take time to honor your grief process and just, spend time with the fact that you're grieving, and that it's going to be a process. It's going to take some time. You're going to do it in your own time, and that's all fine. You can spend time outdoors, which may help you to feel better. You can engage in activities. You can do what comforts you. You can make sure you maintain contact with friends and relatives, either live or virtually. Zoom coffee has become an essential for me. You can find or create support groups. We have support groups, and Denise has support groups that you can join. You can meditate. You can create a calendar to keep yourself accountable. I know particularly when it comes to doing things like that we might not be part of our normal routine, like making sure we talk to somebody outside of the house if we're doing most of our work at home, or making sure we exercise. It's good to log that in a calendar. And just so you say, oh, it's Tuesday, I need to go take that walk. The other thing we need to do is maintain hope, because remember, spring's coming and supposedly the vaccine is coming. For many of us, for some people, I guess the vaccine is here, but we've heard it's coming. I was just in a webinar this morning where they were talking about yet another vaccine, so that's very hopeful. The thing I think we don't think about is that if we're really surrounded by all this grief, that we can choose to take a break from our grief. And it's okay to do that. And taking a break from our grief doesn't mean you're forgetting or you're finished grieving or you're disrespecting the person you lost. Doesn't mean you're done with your process. It means you're taking care of yourself, honoring your process, and making it possible for your mind and body to continue processing your grief. Taking a break can give you a new perspective and the energy you need to continue. I don't know if any of us have thought about the fact that you can actually say, for these 8 hours, for this 1 hour, I'm just going to take a break. And you'll be coming back to it because it's not going away, but you can just set aside that time and say, I'm just going to not think about it right now. And I know that's not easy, but hopefully I can give you some tools that will help with that. So one of the things you can do is create a holiday just for you. Denise was just talking about the fact that that was something that she has done in the past. And I think it's a great idea to just decide that you're going to have a day when you're going to do what you want to do and to honor yourself, especially because in a typical holiday season, and especially this year, I imagine there's been a lot of negotiation with other people. There's been a lot of, figuring things out, like who's at risk, who's been exposed, who can come to the house, who can't come to the house, who can I see, where can I go, all those things. There's been a lot of thinking going on. So I think it's time that we just, take a step back and think about the fact that we've been going through grieving, we've been going through a lot of stress with the pandemic, and it's okay to create a holiday just for us doing the things that we want to do. So one of the ways to plan this is to decide on what your favorite things to do are and create a schedule and decide who else, if anyone, will be involved. Would a holiday for you be just for you? Do you have someone who you could share a holiday with, either virtually or live? Do you want to? I know that sometimes when I've created a holiday just for me, I just want to be by myself. So think about what would be best for you. And then set boundaries. So that may mean letting everybody know who may contact you on an average day. I'm taking a holiday for me tomorrow. I won't be available to talk, or I don't want to talk about loss. I don't want to talk about grief. I don't want to talk about illness. I either might not be available to talk, or here are the list of topics we can talk about. Don't introduce topics I don't want to talk about into my holiday. And that's your right to set the boundary because it's your special day. I just did up a little schedule of what my ideal holiday would be like. I'm not sure when I'm taking it, but here are the things that I would include. So, and maybe this will give you some ideas for what you might include. So if it were me, I would get up and make a special breakfast. Although I did look at this and say, why am I getting up at 8 o'clock? But anyway, I would get up and make a special breakfast. Then I think I would schedule Zoom coffee with a friend, again with the boundaries. Work on a crochet project for an hour and a half. I like to crochet. And this would be an active part of my day, a day when I was, doing something creative and doing something, engaging with yarn and engaging with creativity, because I do design a lot of things myself and tear a lot of things out, but design a lot of things and complete them. Around 11:30, I'd try to figure out where I wanted to order lunch to be delivered, and I would order lunch and have it delivered. Then I think I'd go for a walk around my neighborhood, and I'd come back and watch a movie. And even though that's only 8 hours, that's enough. That's plenty of holiday, actually, for me. And I think that would be just a lovely day. And I'm going to try to figure out when I can have it. Because like most of you, it's really hard to take a whole day. And what do you do if you can't take a whole day for you? Well, I think you can do a few things. You can commit to taking a break from grief. You can set aside 1 hour, just 1 hour, and engage in an active experience that may allow you to experience flow. And I'm wondering, maybe you could put in the chat box, because we'll have a few minutes to talk about this later. If you can just indicate in the chat box, like, have you had it? Do you know what flow is? Have you had flow experiences in the past? And I'm about to explain what it is, but I'm curious about whether anyone has that sort of concept available to them, and what your experience might have been with that. So for those of you who are going, what the heck is flow? Which is what this slide used to say, what the heck is flow? There is a Hungarian-American psychologist whose name I'm going to try to get right. I put the pronunciation key there for me. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who first identified flow in 1975. And what he says about it is the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And there's also a lot of research out there now that shows that experiencing flow can give you a break from grief and stress. So just taking a look back at my schedule for a second, that was one of the reasons I put the asterisk on the crocheting part of my day, because a lot of it is not engaging in an activity, actively being present in an activity, but the crochet project would be. And that's an activity in which I have experienced flow before. So have you ever observed or experienced flow? Again, I'd like you to enter that in the chat if you have. Have you ever been so engaged in an experience that you lost track of time? And when you finished, you felt like you've been in a different world. So, this can happen in a lot of ways. It can happen, when you're working on a work project even, and you're just so deep into it that somebody else walks in the room and you don't even notice. Or when you're doing some kind of an art project and, basically you're concentrating on it so much that when you look up, you realize 2 hours have passed and you didn't even realize 2 hours have passed. In the literature, I found a few examples that I thought were really interesting. One of them is the video gamer. I imagine we all know people who are dedicated video gamers. I know I have one in my house. And it's interesting to think of that as a flow experience, but certainly I've observed, and maybe you've observed, that when a gamer gets a new game, all they want to do is master that game. They just want to sit there and play and play and play and play and play. And it may not be easy. I know that I've heard my son say when he's gotten new games, I'll never figure this out. And then he does. But it's still about the mastery of the game. It's about figuring out everything the game does. And then eventually it's about raising your score in the game. So it was interesting. When I think of flow experiences, I think of something, that engages more of the body, but, clearly that is a flow experience, because that's something where I've seen people just lose hours sitting there and they're so oblivious to everything else going on around them. All they want to think about is the game. The other example that I was thinking about is someone who retires or leaves their job and suddenly engaged in a new hobby, and so engaged in the new hobby that the new hobby takes up so much time. I had a friend who was a school teacher for 40 years. And when she retired, she took up oil painting. And when she was oil painting, she would go into her studio and people knew not to bother her. And she would just work on a painting until it was, at a place where she felt comfortable leaving it, and then come back to it the next day if she felt it needed more. But she really poured a lot of energy into that. It clearly was a learning experience for her. It was challenging, but she was working on mastering it. and she did not want to be disturbed. She just wanted to be there experiencing the flow of creating. So that's another example, and I'm sure you've seen examples of as well, and I'm looking forward to hearing about those later. So what are the benefits of experiencing flow? You get a break from your grief. You're actively engaged in doing something. So it's not like reading a book, although reading a book, there can be flow in reading a book is what I've read, or it's not like watching a TV show, or I'm sorry, it's not like just sitting in front of Netflix, which I do for plenty of hours, because there's not really a lot of engagement in, what I find is there's not a lot of engagement in like the sitcom type show. In a movie, maybe, because there's a lot of plot and there's a lot of figuring things out. And sometimes I think people can experience flow from watching something with a complex plot. But in general, you want to look for something, that involves doing. You can have moments of joy when you're experiencing flow because you're so excited because, well, as Denise was saying earlier, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, she does puzzles, and you can have a moment of joy when you find that right puzzle piece, for example. You can have intense engagement. Speaking of puzzles, when we were able to gather as a family, my family, my extended family would get together, we'd all do a jigsaw puzzle. And really, people would be sitting there doing the jigsaw puzzle, and food would be put on the table would be like, nope, we got to find the right piece. So it's that kind of intense engagement. You have a sense of being removed from your everyday worries and surroundings for a time. You have a feeling of accomplishment, and you develop new coping and doing skills. And the new coping and doing skills, let me just go back to that for a second, is really important. There's a feeling about flow that it actually has to involve some level of challenge, because if it's something that you can just do without thinking about it, obviously you're not as engaged as you are if you can be challenged. But on the other hand, you don't want the challenge to be frustrating because you don't want to feel like you can't actually master the experience. So how can you experience flow? I was thinking about what the steps would be if you had never experienced it and you wanted to try to find something where you could find it and experience it. So I think you would start with, what is your passion? Or what have you always wanted to try? Or what do you want to learn to do better? So maybe you already have a passion, maybe you play guitar, but you want to learn more about blues guitar. Or maybe you've always wanted to try something like, let's say, French cooking, and you figure out a way to try to learn more about that. What do you want to learn to do better? For me, it might be managing Zoom or Excel spreadsheets or something like that, but there's always something I think that we want to learn to do better. Again, it's important to engage actively, to do something, and to choose a level or project that's challenging but not frustrating, as I just mentioned. It's important that you set aside uninterrupted time for this, even if it's just an hour, and to plan for success. So one of the things that I think is really helpful is structured activities. For example, there's a lot of classes online right now in various things, obviously, various art mediums, various creative expressions, yoga, Tai Chi, various things. And I find that one of the things about instructional videos is that you're not only a part of a group that's doing it together, especially if it's happening, like not that you're going to YouTube and finding one, but that you're joining a class at a particular time, but that it's helpful to have an instructor also to do it, because there's something about someone challenging your level that's really important. So the next item is, of course, can you do it alone, or do you prefer to interact with others? And I'll tell you in a little bit about an experience I had recently that at the time I didn't realize was a flow experience, but I realize now that it was. And it was important for me actually to know that I was in class of other people, even though we were only interacting through chat, and also that there was an instructor who was moving it along, the experience along. But you can choose to do it with a partner too, if you wanted to. If you have someone and you're both interested in one of those things, then the two of you could do it together. So I've made some suggestions here for engaging arts activities that might interest you if you're looking for something new. Again, I'm just throwing these out. I was trying to brainstorm, like, what do I think would sort of engender a state of flow? So there's drawing, painting, or trying a new medium. Let's say you draw with pencils. Maybe you want to try drawing with charcoal. You could learn to knit or crochet or learn a new stitch. One of my best early and best pandemic experiences was actually taking a crochet class online. And I would not be the sort of person who would walk into a crochet class in a store, but just because I would feel uncomfortable with that. But it was so great doing it online with other people who also may not walk into a store, some might, and just having the attention of the instructor. You could learn beading, which strikes me as being a very, very fine, very something that takes a lot of attention, a lot of fine attention, so much fine attention that I don't even try. You could explore stained glass techniques, because I think there's always more to learn in stained glass, and one more design to make and one more design to try. You could take a singing lesson or an instrument lesson online, and you could engage in a baking or cooking class if you were interested in that. I'm sure there are many more things that you could do in terms of arts and creativity, and I'm sure you can think of some as well. I came up with a few suggestions for engaging movement activities. You could plan and take a bike ride on a new route with a friend or alone, but it might be more fun with a friend. I have friends who I know used to plan bike rides every week. So they would say, here's the trail, or here's the plan, here's the map, here's what we're going to do. Let's go take this bike ride. Let's see what we can do, how fast we can do it, whatever, what the challenges are. And I think when they're in that state, what they're thinking about is riding the bike. You could take a hike on a new trail, particularly if it's a trail where you might have to figure out where the trail goes. Watch for the blazes, and you can observe the fauna and flora on the trail. Could go skiing and perfect your technique, for those of you who don't mind going downhill at a high speed. You could engage in a yoga class at many different levels, or move up to another level. Move up to a different kind of, or change to a different kind of yoga, try out a different kind of yoga. And you could practice Tai Chi or something like that, where you might have an online class that's in a particular kind of Tai Chi that you're not used to, or that goes to particular poses, I think it's called, that you might not have done. You can tell it's been a while since I've done Tai Chi, can't you? And then I was thinking about suggestions for engaging ongoing projects. You could plan and plant a new garden. Let's say you've been thinking, that space in my yard really needs flowers. And you're going to a store or a catalog and picking out your bulbs and planting the garden and basically doing the whole process. And I know that gardening can be a really flow experience, because you're out there in the outdoors, you're with nature, you're with your plants, you're planting things, and you're just really so absorbed in what you're doing at that moment that it's a great one. You could build a piece of furniture from plans, not IKEA. The assembling furniture doesn't count. The planning and the obtaining the wood and cutting the wood and building it and creating something and painting it, that strikes me as a good engaging activity. And you could learn a new language, especially with other people. I know there are classes online that you can do yourself, but you could do a chat with someone else and just try out your new language, or have a study group that does it together. I'm also thinking about, all the people who do a lot of home renovation. I think a lot of those projects, particularly when it's not repair, but it's like, I'm putting in a new kitchen, I'm putting in a new bathroom, I'm putting down a new floor. A lot of those things can result in flow experiences, I'm sure. So I'm going to tell you about my flow art experience. And this happened actually in early December. In early December. Early December marks the anniversary of the death of the friend who brought me to this work, basically, who the experience with him brought me to wanting to continue to do grief work. And it was a very rough early December. A lot of it was because I couldn't travel. A lot of it was, just the anniversary. I usually go and spend some time with his relative and his friends, and I couldn't do that. I usually go to the cemetery, again, the doing for the person you lost. I couldn't do that. So I admit I was having a rough time. And somehow around the same time, a friend, I believe, sent me a link for an online art class. And it was an art class, basically, where you would learn to make cutouts in the style of Claude Matisse. And I don't know if you're familiar with Matisse, but I'll just briefly tell you the story, which basically he was a painter. And then in his later life, he had a serious operation and he could no longer stand up to paint. So from his bed or from his wheelchair, he would direct other people to help him with his art. And one of the things he started doing was taking scissors and making cutouts out of big pieces of paper that turned into beautiful works of art. Now mine, which this is the reveal of it, by the way, mine is not a beautiful work of art, I would say, although I do quite like it. But the thing that this art class provided, and it was a 1-hour class, was that they basically took you through the exercises of making these cutouts like Matisse. So basically, I sat there with scissors in hand and with paper in hand, and they would show an image on the screen and talk about it and give you a minute to basically make your cutout of that image. So basically, I was engaged with the paper and the scissors and a time limit. And there were other people doing it, and some people were showing their work in the chat room or talking about what it was like. The presenter also had prepared a soundtrack, which I think must have been great for the people who could stand it. I was busy concentrating on cutting out. But another thing about, just an aside, about flow experiences is sometimes it's nice to engage as many senses as you can. So clearly, there was the sight and the touch and then the listening to the soundtrack that she prepared that went along with it was another sense. So I did this, and I made all these cutouts, which I, as I said, kind of like. But at the end of it, I turned off my computer and I looked around and I went, well, that was really good. And it didn't occur to me until afterwards that what had happened was that basically I was having a flow experience because I was so engaged with the computer and so engaged with the materials and so determined to do it during the time frame. And I do not consider myself an artist, a paper artist. I crochet things, but I don't consider myself someone who actually does art on paper. So doing this was really, it was an initial leap for me to do something that was a little bit out of my comfort zone, and to complete it. And it really changed my attitude for that day and a couple of days. It's like, okay, that was really something. And you could see that, it was cutting things out, but the experience was amazing. And so I've really tried to schedule regularly now. I've done 3 different ones now, art workshops for myself, because I don't have time to take a full day off for a holiday for myself, but just to have those breaks that are so amazing. The other thing, and one of the reasons that I told you that I had a master's in education at the beginning, is that I work in a Montessori school. And I think Montessori is all about flow, really, because what the teachers do is they prepare the classrooms and set up materials and instruct the students in the materials, through lessons. Then basically the students get like 2 hours, 2.5 hours for a work cycle where they can go and select a material and complete that lesson basically on their own. And so they're going from, they're choosing a challenging activity. They're working at it until they achieve mastery. They have someone there to guide them if needed. And often we'll see students, in the classroom or even in the hallway who are working on a math a math lesson or a math activity, and people will walk by and they won't even look up because they're so engaged in the flow of that experience. So I think that has informed a lot of my understanding about flow as well. There are a lot of resources on flow out there for you. One thing I would recommend is that you watch, again, I'm going to have to pronounce it, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's TED Talk, which takes about 18 minutes. It was taped a number of years ago, but he really talks about how he developed the concept of flow and touches on the fact that basically when he was a kid, he saw the people who were being very resilient, after the war, and realized that they were able to draw on this resource, and that was what informed that. And then when he came to the United States to study, he furthered that theory. He also has a wonderful book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. Experience is not spelled correctly. And you can also find more resources by Googling flow and psychology. If you just Google flow, you're going to get a lot of engineering articles, but flow and psychology will get you to the right place. And interestingly, I found there was a lot about people surviving the pandemic and thriving in the pandemic because of being able to access flow experiences. So I hope that will be helpful to you as well in trying to figure out how to create your holiday and give yourself a break from grief and create those experiences for yourself. So in a minute, I want to hear from you, hopefully, at how you've experienced flow, have you experienced flow, and how you did. Just wanted to point out that there is contact information for me here in this PowerPoint. You can email me, you can call, and I do have 2 Facebook pages and really hopefully a website in progress. And I can also be found at the Caregiving Years Training Academy website. So thank you for that. And let's go back to this slide. I'm going to try to see you all again, which I can't at the moment. And
so as you start to look at some comments in the chat, Kathy, I have a question for you.
Yes.
How would you describe the difference between flow and focus?
I think it's interesting. Some of the literature talks about hyperfocus too, that there is focus, but I think you can focus without feeling that gratification maybe that comes from actually having that experience of all those factors combined. So you can focus on, like, for example, I can focus on a spreadsheet for hours but not feel gratified, and not have that learning experience. I think it's that where you kind of have a breakthrough, like a creative breakthrough or a breakthrough in understanding, that actually turns that focus into a flow experience.
The word that's coming up for me is transcend.
Yes.
Focus is about right there in the moment, but it sounds like flow is about transcending the moment, right, to create something greater for yourself.
Yes, I think that's a very good observation.
So I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been talking about in the chat room. So for those who shared their flow, it's painting and sailing and reading, working, martial arts, scrapbooking, animals, cleaning, and making jewelry beading.
Those are all wonderful, wonderful flow activities. That's really great. I hadn't thought about sailing and scrapbooking and things like that, but that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I definitely scrapbooking. That was something that stood out to me too. And dancing and piano.
Dancing and piano. Others. Yeah, dancing. I mean, it's definitely true that there's a lot of active things that are flow activities that I'm not as versed in, although I do some yoga, but not that intensely. But it's really great to hear about people's activities. Does anybody have? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to mention too that we're having a conference in April, and the conference theme is our resilient spirit. And Kathy, this would be a fabulous presentation for that conference to talk about flow as a way to build your resilience. That was really an incredible insight to think about flow gives us energy, because I think about resilience as really energy. And there's things in our day that take away our energy, and then it makes it harder for us to overcome or manage that challenge. But flow gives us energy, which means that we have the energy to give to a challenge so we can move through it, get to the other side.
Right. It's really interesting to think about that, because when I first heard about flow, again, it was in the educational setting, and it wasn't like, it was, yes, you're building this repertoire of skills, but it wasn't like, this is where you'll build your resilience to deal with issues that come up. And I think it's only really since the pandemic, and since well, actually, you and I attended a workshop, although not on the same day, where I think one of the presenters touched on flow and grief, and that happened right around the same time that I was having my Matisse flow experience. So it kind of all fit together for me at that point.
So I'm curious about that 1 hour that you spent in that art class, and you talked about how it changed the next few days for you. How did it change your grief?
Um, I don't know if it changed my, well, didn't change my grief overall, but it changed my grieving. It changed that I was really pretty much consumed in the grieving at that point for everything, for him, and for not being able to share it with the people I usually share it with, and not being able to go on the trip, and, all those things that, I listed earlier that we were missing. And it really just, every time I thought about it for a couple of days, I was like, oh, that was great. Like, it gave me some happiness to think about. The other thing I think that was really important for me, and that, which I didn't mention in the slideshow, is that I was really glad I picked an activity that didn't have any relationship to the grief.
Right.
Right. Because, I thought about, oh, maybe I should take guitar lessons, but he played guitar. So I didn't want to do that because it was loaded. Whereas doing an art class online was completely like, there was no baggage. It was like, this is me going into this art class with absolutely no expectations and no baggage and nothing. So I think that can really help in terms of dealing with the grief, is realizing that there are things that you can do, that may not stir up memories, and that may just give you a new set of memories of your own.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think oftentimes when we think about resources for grief support, we go to support groups or some kind of information like books around grieving. And this is helpful. And you can also look to using your time to give back to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a higher level of self-care, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think as caregivers and as grievers, we don't think very often about giving back to ourselves and taking care of ourselves, because it's so all-consuming. And I think it's really important to make that time. As we all know, it's really important to make that time. But it's great if you can find something that gets you excited, that really motivates you to try to set that time aside too.
And I also think there is a level sometimes of discouragement when we don't feel well. And oftentimes the grieving is an experience where we don't really feel well because we're really missing, we're feeling a void. And the encouragement we can receive from a flow reminds us that we still can tap into feeling good, that emotion has not been lost to us.
Right. Right. Even if it's isolated, even if it's just that 1 hour, it's like, I can still do that. I can still feel that.
Right.
I think that's a hopeful experience.
And what's interesting is you had a hopeful hangover then from that art class.
I did.
Because it changed the next couple days for you.
It did. Well, interestingly, the holidays were a very hard time because my family usually travels. We couldn't travel. And we've, as I have said to people, we traveled every year for 40 years. We couldn't travel this year. It was really hard. So I did another art class, and then I had that to fall back on. I was like, I'm going to try that again, and it was great. So now I know for me that's my tool. That when I'm feeling down or discouraged, go online and see if I can find an art class. So that's really helped.
Yeah, I love that we have a go-to, an action we can take, that we don't have to stay stuck and feeling horrible, that there are ways to soothe ourselves. So one of the conversations that you and I have had when we've been managing our virtual support group around grieving is what happens with some of the attendees in our group. They will come and say, I've started a project, but I haven't finished it. So I started another project, but I haven't finished that one. So I started another project and didn't finish that one. This insight about flow makes me look at that in a little different way. And I'm wondering if they're looking for flow and they just haven't found flow. We've talked about it in terms of the process, that just connecting to an activity is a process that can be helpful. And the success of the process doesn't mean that you complete whatever that activity is. I'm getting the feeling that there's a sense of accomplishment in a flow when you complete something. And so what attendees to our grief support group will say that there actually is frustration about not being able to complete something. So they go to a different activity to try to complete it. And the frustration is, why can't I complete something?
Right. I almost wonder, I know we've had that conversation, and I almost wonder if they're trying to complete something, if their goal is too big. You know, if maybe they need a smaller goal, like I'm going to complete learning this one knitting stitch, or I'm going to try knitting and see if that helps me fill my time, but I'm going to see if I can learn this one stitch. Oh, maybe I'll see if I can learn this next stitch. I wonder if some of the things that they're going to, because I'm thinking there was also someone who went to paint by numbers and things like that. You know, it's like maybe we can help them actually try to figure out how to set it up better so that they can turn it into a learning experience and a fulfilling experience.
Okay, we have a great question.
Sometimes I think people from a psychological standpoint might not want to finish it, like subconsciously, because if I finish this project and I don't feel better, or I don't have less grief, right? Now what? Like, it's not helping, right? Like, if you do all you can, then what do you have? What is your next resource? So I think sometimes people don't finish things on a subconscious level for reasons also of that nature.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, we've talked about that too, what it means to finish something. So Arlene has a really good question for you from the chat room. So she writes, most of the activities you mentioned have an end, such as an art class, a hike. However, playing video games can go on for hours or all day and not have an end and become addicting. What is the difference between playing video games as a flow and not stopping or becoming an addiction?
I think that's an interesting question. I know that in the literature I read, they talk about video games, and I understood it because in my house, what happens is that my son buys a game, has to master the game. Once he's mastered the game, he doesn't care about the game that much. But I think there probably are people who are not tuned into that, who are playing the game. A lot of people do play video games for escape also. Maybe maybe it's hard to achieve mastery. Maybe actually they're just competing over and over with people, and maybe they are achieving mastery, and maybe that's addicting. So I think it's a good point that people may play video games for different reasons. And I was actually really surprised to see the literature as being a positive thing, but that's okay.
I guess my point is my kids can play video games or be on a screen all day long.
Right.
I've learned some of it is functional. My daughter plays a video game, but then goes on YouTube to find out more about the story of the video game. I'm like, okay, that's somewhat functional. My son can play Fortnite for hours and hours, and then it's functional when he's playing with a friend, but then it goes on for hours. I also try to get them involved in, like my son, in the martial arts. You need to practice your martial arts. You need to read. You need to do your instruments. So hopefully to gain that flow of becoming more interested in the other things that they're interested in. But video games, I feel, can be a problem. But it can be functional. But I feel like, at least with my kids, I have to teach them when it's functional and when it's not functional. So then when they get older, they can develop a flow of something, but not always video games, to be engaged in other parts of life, which right now is really difficult because of the pandemic, because that's how they communicate with their friends, and that's their playtime with their friends. So it's a constant, kind of a constant challenge of trying for me to figure out what's functional and what's not functional, but then allowing it at the same time. So it's such a balance with video games because you can be so engrossed in it. So it's interesting.
I think it's also interesting, with people who are developing, with kids, with, people who are not adults and sort of who, may not have had all the experiences that we've had, who may need boundaries set. Because when I think about the children in our school who I think are having flow experiences working with Montessori materials, it's a prepared environment with really strict boundaries in some ways, but within those boundaries, they can make choices, but the only choices they can make are the choices that we know are good for them, right? So I think it's great that you're actually teaching them, about boundaries and about other things, so that they can try to experience flow in some way, which may be, the thing that actually makes them appreciate the experience more and get more out of the experience. And I don't present myself to be an expert on flow either, but there's a lot more out there that I don't know, but I appreciate your input there, and I do understand the concern.
But video games can be challenging and get a sense of accomplishment. It's just balancing that with other things, because it could be so engaging and so, there has to be a good balance, because it could be their whole life.
And I think of it also too in terms of the brain development of younger individuals, and that's the risk. That's what could cause the addiction, is because of their brain development, which is why you're smart to put the boundaries around it, so you know what could become an addiction. So you put the boundaries to help them avoid that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments in the chat?
So what would you challenge us to do as a result of your presentation today, Kathy?
I would challenge you all to go home, and if you have not, if you're not regularly engaging in an experience that creates flow for you, to try to determine if you can think of one that would. Going back to the slide that I had where you're talking about how to plan that out and how to figure out what might work for you. See if you can think of an activity that you might like to do, or something you've always wanted to try, or something you have tried in the past that was really fulfilling for you, but maybe you don't do anymore. And just set aside a time and take that break from your life, take a break from the grief and the stress, and try that activity and see what happens.
And maybe the insight too is that there's an end to that activity, which helps the flow, which is really what Arlene was saying, that it keeps it a flow if there's an end to it. Mm-hmm. And thinking about when's the right end for you. How do you stay in the flow for a certain number of minutes?
Right.
So that doesn't take you into something that is frustrating or unhealthy.
It's one of the reasons I really like the idea of online workshops, because, or live workshops when we, remember live workshops? Yeah, we used to do that because there's a beginning and an end, and there's usually, if the person's planned it well, there's usually a plan. So there's like a whole experiential piece you can have, and then there's a closing to it. So that's nice. First of all, it doesn't bleed into your day a lot, and it's just defined for you.
And defining it maybe with some rituals. This is when we start, this is when we finish. Mm-hmm. And that can help with creating a healthy habit around the beginning and the end.
Right.
And putting so then it has some more, it's more of a form. It's not a free flow, it's a form. This is right. When we begin, this is when we end. This is how we know we begin, this is how we know we end. So for instance, when you took that art class, there probably was a ritual around how it began. There actually were rituals throughout the class because you had a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably were given instructions when the minute started and then instructions when the minute ended. So there were consistency within the class with the rituals. And then there probably was some closing ritual around, okay, now you have a piece of art.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And it's sort of, I was thinking about a yoga practice too that has a start and a finish, or, anything like that, where there's a clear beginning, a clear ending, and then a period in between where you need to be paying attention.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everybody so much for being here. Thanks for your comments and your insights. Always so helpful to engage with you because you bring this next level of insight for us. Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.